Despite being one of DC's biggest characters, it took The Flash until 2023 to get his own movie, a movie that was announced the same week the second episode of The Flash show came out in 2014 and was released a few weeks after the same show ended on its 9th season. The comparison between the two Flash franchises doesn't end there either. While Grant Gustin is a pretty beloved casting and a well-respected actor, Ezra Miller couldn't be further from that, and while The Flash show brought in fantastic ratings for the CW and remained an extremely popular show for years, becoming one of the longest running DC shows ever, The Flash movie ended its 10-year development process following a few years of Ezra Miller being in the news for less than positive reasons, with decent reviews and a very poor opening weekend at the box office. On an apparent budget of $200 million, not counting the marketing, which is typically around another 50% of the budget, making it more so like $300 million, although maybe more because it just felt like the marketing for The Flash was even more so than the typical movie of this size. The Flash opened to around $55 million domestically, $12 million less than Black Adam, and around another $70 million internationally for a grand total of around $125 million, and while it's not impossible the movie will have legs and make more than the bad opening weekend suggests, the most that this movie can possibly make is $400 million, but that is very optimistic. Even then though, considering its budget, The Flash will only just make its money back, and what's so much more likely than that is that The Flash as a movie will lose money. But how did this happen to a character like The Flash? For decades, Warner Brothers only made movies about Superman and Batman or characters who are adjacent to them, while not seeing much potential in the rest of the DC universe. Maybe they were kinda right, since while Wonder Woman and especially Aquaman for some reason did very well, Green Lantern was a big flop, Shazam didn't do very well, and its sequel was a huge flop, and Flash is flopping as well. The lesson Warner Brothers took from Green Lantern specifically is that Green Lantern is not worth investing in at all, which is why we've seen almost zero Green Lantern content since then, while failing to realize that the reason Green Lantern failed was because it's a bad movie and an ugly one at that. This might have happened to The Flash as well if the franchise hadn't already had a successful TV show, or if someone like James Gunn wasn't in charge of DC, who's giving opportunities to much smaller characters like the Authority. The reason Green Lantern flopped wasn't because Green Lantern is a character without box office potential. In fact, I think Green Lantern is DC's biggest untapped goldmine by far, and for the same reason, The Flash didn't flop because people don't like The Flash. The Flash is arguably one of DC's top 4 most beloved and popular heroes, so why did it flop? Well, there are a myriad of reasons that all come together to make a movie that never really stood a chance. One reason is actually the character of The Flash. The Flash as a character is very popular, the CW version is beloved, the comic book version obviously, but I don't think the DCEU Flash specifically was a very beloved character. Debuting beyond the Cameo in another box office failure, Justice League, Ezra Miller's Flash is beloved by some, especially the Snyder fans, and I wouldn't say this is a largely hated character, but I do think general audiences have always been largely indifferent to this character, while hardcore Flash fans like myself know how poor of an adaptation this version of the character is, and how miscast Ezra Miller is. This is definitely an unfortunate byproduct of the Justice League behind the scenes disaster, because in the Snyder Cut we'd eventually get, Barry is marginally less annoying, actually has a role in the story and a point to being there, but more so than anything is the focus of what is maybe the coolest moment in the entire DCEU, which really shows his powers on display, which might hype people up to see him in his own movie and those powers again. Unfortunately, most people have not seen this movie. Unfortunately, general audiences only really watched Justice League, and even then, it flopped as well. So, general audiences were absolutely not clamoring for a DCEU Flash movie, and honestly, neither were hardcore Flash fans. The main reason for this, outside of a lot of Barry's dialogue, the main reason this version of Barry Allen isn't beloved is the actor who plays him. In my personal opinion, although it really doesn't seem to be an uncommon one, Ezra Miller is completely miscast as Barry Allen and has been very consistently overshadowed throughout the entirety of the 2010s and early 2020s by Grant Gustin, who's held back by a low-budget soap opera storytelling and especially in the late seasons, really bad writing. This, however, is subjective. What is 100% objective is Ezra Miller just being a generally bad person whose absence from prison prison leaves thousands of people confused. Ezra has been accused and or has been proven to have committed a litany of crimes ranging from harassment to grooming to assault, all while Warner Brothers has been completely silent on the matter while still going forward with The Flash. Now, I'm not saying they should have canceled The Flash. It'd be ridiculous to scrap a movie they already spent hundreds of millions of dollars on that presumably thousands of people worked on, all because of the main actor. However, I do understand why people are talking about this, as because Warner Brothers Discovery recently set an unprecedented precedent of canceling an already made movie worth up to $70 million at least in Batgirl, all just for a tax write-off. And Batgirl just so happens to be another DC movie that was supposed to feature Michael Keaton's Batman. Flash is definitely a much more expensive movie with over double the budget, so I'm not saying it's a one-to-one comparison, but I do think that Warner Brothers dug themselves a PR hole when canceling an already made DCEU movie, setting the precedent for the possibility of canceling others, like The Flash, when its main star turns out to be a violent and possibly unhinged criminal. In the end, I just think discourse around Ezra Miller and them constantly being in the news overshadowed the marketing for The Flash and diminished any and all hype that The Flash might have already had, as when all of the news relating to the movie is so negative, people will be pushed off from going to see it, and when the trailers show that the movie won't just have one Ezra Miller but two, yeah, I understand the hesitance to want to endure that. And speaking of the trailers, I really don't think they helped either. While I would say the trailers were mostly pretty cool, with a much more serious tone than the movie did end up having, the trailers also did showcase the two Barry Allens, something that they really should have kept to themselves, and also quite a few things that are very easy to pick apart and make fun of. Flash's cowl or helmet look weirdly unfitting in the trailers, which was mostly not the case in the movie itself. The second Barry suit looked extremely stupid, and the CGI, more so than anything, just looked awful. And with the CGI specifically, I couldn't tell you the amount of people making fun of it online, and for good reason. The CGI being textureless was apparently a stylistic intentional choice, as the director wanted to convey things from Barry's distorted perspective. Like I said in my review, this is very hard to believe, but even if it is true, honestly it makes things worse, because instead of blaming it on time or money or CGI artists being stretched too thin, we can now blame it on a bad creative decision that didn't just not work, but probably made many people not want to watch the movie based off of the trailers, because the apparent stylistic choice also looks exactly like what would otherwise be considered bad CGI, especially with the human faces all entering the realm of the uncanny valley, and it's just so off-putting. The biggest offender of the CGI issue was definitely the cameos. I don't know how much this affected the box office, but the fact that almost all of the discourse around the cameos was negative might have, whether that be the CGI or the fact that someone like Grant Gustin wasn't even considered, it might have dismayed people from seeing it. The fact that almost all the cameos were Superman and Batman, and we knew that going in a Flash movie, while the 9-season-long show that ran entirely within the development process of this one movie wasn't even considered, left a very bad taste in my mouth when I heard it. And the only reason I heard it is because the director was openly talking about it. Having seen the movie, the CGI isn't just ugly, it makes you feel weird, it makes you feel bad, seeing those disturbing looking characters whose actors are dead, with George Reeves' cameo in particular being incredibly messed up given his story. And Twitter was having a field day with recordings of these cameos on Twitter during the opening weekend, and yeah, I get it. I could see someone going to Twitter, watching a video of the cameo, see someone roasting it, and then just deciding not to go watch it because of the bad CGI of the cameos or the movie in general. The marketing of this movie was very Michael Keaton Batman heavy, and while I'm sure there are people who went to go see the movie for him, I don't think there were many. He's a 71-year-old actor who was Batman 30 years ago and 5 Batman ago. I just don't think that's a general audience draw. Most people under 40 don't really care about him. Most people over 40 go to superhero movies less and less. I'm not saying Keaton's Batman isn't popular at all, but he's nowhere near popular enough to be counted on to be a box office draw, especially for a movie called The Flash. I hate the idea of the first Flash movie's marketing focusing on Batman, but if we have to focus on a Batman, at least a Batman from the past, Christian Bale would have done so much more. Bale Batman might have fit the comic booky nature of the movie a lot less, and the ending of The Dark Knight Rises doesn't really warrant going back to that universe, but there's no denying he 100% would have gotten so much more butts into seats. The other non-Flash characters clearly didn't do much either. either. I don't think Zod is a draw. I don't think this version of Supergirl was much of a draw either, as seeing Flash and Supergirl teaming up in live action isn't exactly a new and novel experience. Her hair and costume kind of make her look like an Elseworld Supergirl, not Kara Zor-El. As much as I would have liked to deny it, I think superhero fatigue definitely exists these days, as it seems like there is a growing and stronger correlation between superhero movie quality and its box office success. So far, the good movies of 2023, Guardians of the Galaxy and Spider-Verse, did really well, while the bad ones did very poorly, like Shazam, which made like no money, and Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, which I'm pretty sure made less money than the first Ant-Man. The Flash isn't bad, but it got middling reviews, and the buzz around it online is very mixed. They tried this weird viral marketing campaign by having all these random celebrities say the movie was awesome, pretty transparently because they were paid to do so. I'm assuming there's no other reason they would do this. It's a very weird attempted marketing campaign that I don't really think worked, especially when the reviews from actual critics came out, telling audiences that the movie was just fine. It's good, sure, according to the critics at least, but it's not a masterpiece. David Zaslav and James Gunn specifically hyped up this movie tremendously, to the point where, after the reviews came out, and especially after having seen the movie, their comments simply no longer seem genuine, if they ever really did. Having watched the movie, I'm baffled by why they would call this the best superhero movie of all time or the best movie of the year. It just doesn't make any sense. To that point, one of the two superhero movies this year that did really well was Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, which just so happens to also be about a multiversal level threat with tons of cameos and a plot that is heavily based on the death of the main character's parent. Across the Spider-Verse and The Flash have relatively similar plots and concepts, but the former executes literally everything better. The Flash is pretty ugly, Spider-Verse is maybe the best looking movie of all time. The characters, the music, the action, the writing, the cameos, Across the Spider-Verse eclipses The Flash at every turn, and this is very important because it came out 2 weeks before The Flash, and maybe people just didn't want to watch an inferior version of a movie they saw 2 weeks ago. Aside from Spider-Verse, the month is absolutely stacked with competition for The Flash. Transformers the week before, Elemental the same day, or Indiana Jones in 2 weeks. The competition was strong, and The Flash just didn't stand out. And finally, I just don't think there's any denying the fact that while Marvel's brand is a bit damaged, DC is just dead at this point. Aside from The Batman, which does not care about its DC branding because it's Batman, every DC movie has flopped to varying degrees at the box office in the 2020s, and outside of the Batman brand, which also includes Joker, the last highly successful DC movie was Aquaman in 2018. DC is very inconsistent with their movies. I don't think general audiences care at all about the DCEU anymore, and while the looming brand reboot might lower people's interest, that shouldn't have applied to The Flash because it's supposed to be the movie that reboots the universe. They didn't include that at all in the marketing, and in the end, it technically actually didn't reboot anything. It technically also does not matter. DC is simply in desperate need of a rejuvenation of consistent quality, competent world building, and a new brand image in general before their non-Batman movies start making money again. This year does still have 2 DC movies left, including Blue Beetle, which looks good but I highly doubt will do well, and Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, which sounds bad from audience test screenings, and because of that, despite Aquaman's insane box office, I again doubt that Aquaman 2 will do all that well if it gets bad reviews. Next year only has Joker 2, which probably will do very well because it's a Batman adjacent movie, it's about the Joker, but maybe 2022 will be the break from the DC Universe general audiences needed before 2025, and I'm really hoping the rest of Gods and Monsters builds DC's brand up to what it should be, starting truly with Superman Legacy. So, The Flash flopped at the box office for a myriad of reasons, including DC brand being dead, people not loving Ezra Miller's Flash, and also Ezra Miller's crimes, which are all up in the news, general bad superhero movie fatigue, awful CGI and trailers, negative discourse around the CGI and the cameos, Keaton not being much of a draw, coming out in a stacked month, coming out just 2 weeks after a far better, very similar movie, and the weird marketing campaign leading into just okay reviews. The Flash has huge potential as a brand going into the future, and I don't think this movie will affect future plans for the character, aside from basically putting the nail into the coffin of any possibility that Ezra Ezra Miller will remain, which is probably a good thing, but I did want to look at exactly why the first ever Flash movie flopped, because they just took the wrong idea from the Green Lantern movie flopped, and I really don't want to go 10 years now without any Flash content. Hopefully, though, this is maybe the end of the Barry Allen era, and in the DCU, we could get some really good Wally West content.